Stroke risk via TSI Proxy, number 1556, VPT 105, the 3rd of March 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: Stroke risk. Preface: I began self-studying epilepsy and seizures after arriving in Honolulu, Hawaii on February 28, 2026, instead of immediately producing formal medical research papers. I started writing a learning logbook of epilepsy as a vehicle to record my understanding and share it with other patients through mass communication channels. A few weeks ago, after digging deeply into the subject of stroke to understand its causes, especially in my personal case, I identified that the root cause of my first stroke on June 21, 2025 resulted from weight gain that began in 1978 at age 31. In 1968, at age 21, I weighed 140 pounds via my 20. 10 years later, by 1978 at age 31, I weighed 174 pounds via my 25, crossing into the overweight category. By 1990, at age 43, I weighed over 200 pounds via my 28.7, and I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That marked the beginning of many health problems. Diabetes silently and progressively damages multiple organ systems. From 1993 to 2009, I relied primarily on diabetes medications without implementing meaningful lifestyle modifications. As a result, I experienced 5 heart attacks between 1994 and 2004. By 2010, I was further diagnosed with kidney failure, neuropathy nearly leading to toe amputation, and retinopathy nearly causing blindness. The year 2010, my weight at 220 pounds and BMI at 31.6, was my wake-up year. I shut down both my profitable business and charitable activities, and focused essentially on restoring my health. I began self-studying medicine and health independently, reading more than 10,000 published medical papers. Thus far, I have single-authored 1,555 medical research papers on conditions that I have personally suffered from or considered high risk. On June 21, 2025, I suffered a hemorrhagic stroke in the Pontine region, which carries a very high mortality rate. Miraculously, I survived. During the following 8 months, I wrote more than 200 stroke-related research papers and gained deeper insight into stroke mechanisms. Now, 8 months later, while investigating epilepsy as a complication of my stroke, a new observation emerged regarding stroke risk quantification. This paper presents that idea. Introduction. Through my viscoplastic energy model VMT analysis, I concluded that my stroke resulted from severe calcification cerebral microvessels caused by 36 years of accumulated diabetes damages. As an engineer, I have seen water pipes in homes and power plants gradually become calcified, with mineral deposits accumulating along the inner walls. These calcified pipes become stiff and fragile, making them prone to rupture under pressure. Cerebral blood vessels are no different, and fortunately, unlike industrial systems, we cannot replace calcified microvessels inside the human brain. I divided my diabetic history into 2 phases. The first 20 years, from 1990 through 2009, during which I depended entirely on medications without lifestyle correction, contributed approximately 91% of my stroke risk probability from cerebral vessel calcification. The subsequent 16-year lifestyle adjustment period, from 2010 through 2025, contributed my stroke risk probability only about 9%. In other words, the structural weakening of my cerebral blood vessels was primarily established during the first 2 decades 1990 to 2009 of poorly controlled metabolic stress under medication-only management. This 91% versus 9% stroke risk distribution I calculated using the viscoplastic energy method is a sobering reminder of the accumulated damage theory in biophysics. Even with perfect control now, the infrastructure carries the scars of the earlier 2 decades between 1990 and 2009. Obesity-induced diabetes surveyed as the root cause, however. The immediate trigger of my stroke was acute hypertension, with a systolic blood pressure of 175 mmHg near noon on June 21, 2025. Importantly, I have never been a chronic hypertension patient. Over the previous 15 years of quarterly clinic visit records, my blood pressure never exceeded 140 mmHg. My daily blood pressure measurements have revealed a similar finding. This illustrates the limitation of isolated biomarker snapshots. A single normal reading does not reflect cumulative vascular stiffness or vulnerability. Long-term trajectory analysis, like a motion picture, provides far more meaningful insight than occasional measurements similar to a snapshot. Development of the Triggering Sensitivity Index TSI. A few weeks ago, I formulated a quantitative indicator or proxy called the Stroke Triggering Sensitivity Index TSI. Defined as TSI equals SBP TBP / 45 * SBP 120 * 100, where SBP equals systolic blood pressure and equals diastolic blood pressure up equals SBP dBP pulse pressure. The structure of this formula reflects two key mechanical factors. Pulse pressure PP represents arterial stiffness. Higher pulse pressure indicates reduced vascular compliance due to calcification or aging. Systolic blood pressure SBP represents acute hemodynamic load applied to the vessel wall. The normalization constants of 45 mmHg for pulse pressure and 120 μ for SBP represent reference values associated with healthy vascular conditions. Therefore, TSI integrates both chronic structural vulnerability stiffness from diabetes and the acute triggering force pressure spikes from acute hypertension. TSI is not merely a blood pressure index, it is a stress amplification model that combines vascular stiffness and acute hypertension together. Why multiplication not addition is essential? Because stroke risk increases disproportionately when stiffness and pressure rise together. Conceptually, if vessels are stiff but pressure is low, rupture risk remains moderate. If pressure spikes but vessels are flexible, damage risk may still be limited. However, when high stiffness and acute pressure elevation coexist, stroke risk increases nonlinearly. TSI is most meaningful when interpreted as a trajectory, not a single number. TSI captures this multiplicative interaction and serves as a convenient and practical monitoring tool on my iPhone screen. In simplified engineering terms, weakness multiplied by acute load equals rupture probability. Because the terms are multiplied, a small increase in both stiffness and pressure results in a nonlinear spike in TSI, which explains why my June 2025 data showed such a volatile red zone. In summary, although this TSI is personal proxy and not a validated clinical tool, it serves as useful information regarding the relative load-to-tolerance ratio. Application to my case. This article presents my TSI values from the 1st of January 2025 through the 3rd of March 2026, covering 6 months before the stroke and 8 months after the stroke. By comparing TSI trends before and after June 21, 2025, I can clearly observe how structural vulnerability combined with acute pressure spikes culminated in a high-probability stroke event. This TSI score represents preventive medicine in quantitative form. The purpose of this TSI model is not to predict exact timing of stroke, but to identify elevated vulnerability states. It provides a dynamic, quantitative measure of trigger sensitivity that traditional blood pressure readings alone cannot reveal. Through this framework, stroke risk becomes a measurable interaction between chronic vessel stiffness and acute hemodynamic stress, rather than an isolated event. Data analysis from the attached TSI dataset and the 3 TSI curve figures, daily data, 90-day moving average data, and weekly data. There are 3 obvious conclusions. In late June 2025, the period of my stroke, my TSI ranged between approximately 112 and 124. More critically, my TSI reached 163 on June 14, 2025. 1 week prior to the stroke event. This spike indicates extreme stroke trigger sensitivity. My monthly TSI values declined to 104 in July 2025 and 100 in August 2025, and remained below 100 after September 2025. This reflects progressive stabilization of vascular stress conditions following the event. My viscoplastic energy VMT analysis further shows that pulse pressure contributed 51% of my total TSI energy, while systolic blood pressure contributed 49%. The cumulative VMT energy level increased from 26% in June 2025 to 66% in July 2025, a large jump. The stroke month of June 2025 produced a 40% energy increase, representing significant stress amplification. The VMT strain stress loop diagram is particularly insightful. It mirrors a hysteresis loop used in material science. The fact that my PP and SBP contribute almost equally 51% versus 49% suggests that my stroke risk is balanced between chronic damage and acute behavior. This means that lifestyle BP control is now my primary lever for survival, since the structural damage is largely irreversible. Conclusion: numbers do not lie. Scientific analysis reveals the structural truth behind medical events. This quantitative analysis demonstrates the usefulness of the TSI proxy in explaining the mechanism behind my recent stroke. It confirms that stroke is not a random event, but the result of measurable interaction between chronic vascular stiffness and acute pressure elevation. Epilogue. That is why I trust TSI. It does not flatter me. It does not comfort me. It simply reflects mechanical truth. As a scientist and engineer, fancy words do not impress me. Truth touches my heart. After writing more than 250 stroke-related papers, I distilled to core lessons. First, the root cause of my stroke was 36 years of diabetes, especially the uncontrolled period from 1990 to 2009. Second, TSI gives me a real-time trigger sensitivity warning on my iPhone screen. It transforms invisible vascular vulnerability into a visible number. That number may save my life. For the first time in my life, I feel that I have a real-time control panel like an airplane pilot. For 20 years, from 1990 through 2019, I was effectively blind under medication-only treatment. Now I can see the system state on my iPhone every time I measure my blood pressure. That psychological shift not only matters, but is also significant in controlling my own destiny. I finally feel that I now understand my stroke case. With help of TSI, I have a peaceful mind about how to capture the trigger of a possible future stroke. After all, this has been the purpose behind my previous 250 stroke research papers. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.